Hello and welcome to another episode of the Basildon Council official podcast, a place where you, our residents, get to find out about things happening around in your borough that affect your everyday lives. I am your host, Ryan, and today I am pleased to say that joining me is Mr. Mark Francois, MP. How are you today?
Good morning, Ryan. I'm very well, thank you.
Good. We've never had an MP on the show so far. We've had councillors, we've had charities, we've had very important people. We've not had an MP, so thank you very much for giving us your time today. I really do appreciate it.
No, delighted.
I'd love to. We love talking with councillors to try and find out a bit about them. Sort of, you know, who are they? Sort of, we can look at councillors sometimes and think, oh, like decision makers. Oh, they don't really care about the little people and whatnot. But you are a local lad, aren't you? So tell us a little bit more about Mark Francois.
So, okay, well, I was born in 1965 in Crouch End, or as the estate agents call it these days, Crouchond, but it was Crouch End in my day, in North London. And my parents, Reg and Anna, moved out to Basildon in 1971 when I was aged 6 years old, and we moved into a brand new house in Langdon on what was officially called the Five Links Estate, but all the locals nicknamed it Alcatraz because from a distance it had some sort of 3 or 4 story blocks of flats, and someone rather unkindly said it looked like a prison. So anyway, the nickname stuck. So if you're of a certain age and you live in Basildon and someone says Alcatraz, everyone knows where you mean. Anyway, so grew up there. I went to Chowdhury Infants and Junior School, and which no longer exists. And then my secondary was St Nicholas, which is these days known as James Hornsby. And there were 2 big secondary schools in Langdon in those days. St Nicholas was one, and Langdon High Road was the other. We were mortal rivals, and eventually they closed Langdon. That's a housing estate now, and they consolidated the 2 schools on one site. But such was the rivalry between the schools, even between the staff, that they had to come up with a neutral name. So they called it James Hornsby after a very prominent teacher, I think, from the 19th century. So that's where I did my secondary education. I then went off to Bristol University to read history. I then read for an MA in war studies, sort of glorified military history, at King's College London in the Strand. And then came back, spent some time in the Territorial Army as an infantry officer. This is during the Cold War when the Berlin Wall was still up. Yeah. So I served in the Royal Anglian Regiment, which is our local regiment. And then in 1991, I started out in politics and I got elected onto what was then Basildon District Council. And I served for 4 years as my ward was Langdon Hills, which included my old estate. And then from there, in 1997, I was the sort of Tory sacrificial lamb against Ken Livingstone, Red Ken, as he was then known, in Brent East. And then I managed to get, after that, having sort of earned my spurs, if you like, I managed to get selected as the Conservative candidate for Rayleigh. I had to beat Boris Johnson to get it, incidentally, but I did. And then I was elected as the MP for Rayleigh in 2001. And, so 15 minutes down the A127 from Basildon. And I've been a Member of Parliament since, for 22 years, ever since then.
It's a long old time.
Yeah, a fair bit.
Yeah.
And in 2001, the Rayleigh constituency also included Southwood and Ferrers and a number of, rather picturesque villages like the Hanningfields and Ramsden Heath and Downham. And then, rather like the good Lord, the Boundary Commission sometimes works in mysterious ways. So in 2010, they moved the boundaries around quite a bit. And that particular area was switched to Malden under my great friend John Whittingdale. And instead, they gave me Wickford. So the constituency from 2010 has been known as Rayleigh and Wickford. And there was quite a sweet little moment when, I came here to meet the leaders of the council after the 2010 election. And I met a number of the council's directors, some of whom had still been there when in the early 90s when I was a councillor. So we came into this meeting room in the Basildon Centre, and we all said hello to each other, and I recognised half of them, and one of them turned to me and just said, "Welcome home, Mark."
That's nice.
And I must admit, I was like, "Can you give me a minute?" So it was quite emotional.
Yeah.
So I now rep part of my constituency in Wickford, which I'm very proud to represent. He's administered by Basildon Borough Council, on which I served myself as a councillor for 4 years. So like a lot of my constituents in Rayleigh and Wickford, I have a link back to the capital, and lots of people who live in South Essex, be it a first, a second, or a third generation link, they have a link back to London. So in that way, I hope I'm very, representative of the people that I serve.
Absolutely, and you've been in this game for quite a long time, and you say that story where you come back and they said, "Welcome home." What got you into sort of politics? What made you want to sort of go, "Do you know what, I want to give it a go here in my sort of local area and make a change"? Like, what made you want to do that to sort of come full circle? And do you still think, we're still making a change?
Well, I'll come on to the why did I do it in a minute, but in 1997, when I fought Ken Livingstone, so this was in the dying years of the major government, he and I had a hustings. I'll never forget it. It was at Willesden Green Library, and politically, chalk and cheese. Other than the fact we were both born in London, we had very little in common. And in those days, Ken Livingstone was a national name. Mm. But at this hustings, he said something which I've never forgotten. He said, "Mark, I've been an MP, you've not," and at that time that was true. He said, "But a general election is an opportunity to commune with your 68,000 employers." Now, in Rayleigh and Wickford, I have 79,000 employers, but the principle is exactly the same. I work for those people. They don't work for me. And every few years, in a general election, in effect, you go back to your employers and ask them to renew your contract of employment at the ballot box. And it's their right, if they so wish, to employ someone else. That's democracy. Mm-hmm. So I've always tried to bear that in mind. I've always tried to remember that I work for those 79,000 people. They are my employers. And it's my job to speak for them, to try and be their champion. So if I learnt nothing else from Red Ken, I learnt that. And why did I go into it? It's a bit of a long story, but so as not to bore your listeners, I'll give you the quick version. My father, Reginald Francois, fought in the Second World War. He was born in 1925 in North London, and in 1943, at the age of 18, he signed up and joined the Royal Navy. And a year later, he found himself on a minesweeper at D-Day, Stoker First Class Reg Francois. So I was always interested in history and military history, a lot because of Dad. Yeah. Unfortunately, he died when I was only 14 years of age. But so as I read about the war and what had happened, the more I read, the more fascinated I became, including about the run-up. And there was this guy called Winston Churchill who had warned everyone about what Hitler was up to, and no one really believed him, and what was all that about? Mm. And he was a member of Parliament, and what was all that about? And he made these amazing speeches in the House of Commons, and what was all that about? And the more I read, the more fascinated I became. So I think from about the age of 13, I decided that I wanted to be an MP. Mm. And so I got onto Basildon Council and sort of worked my way up the ladder, and I got elected in 2001, so when I was 36 years of age, which is relatively young for an MP, but not the youngest by any means. So a lot of it was to do with Dad, and I suppose Churchill was my idol, and it sort of went from there. And I say I've been doing it about 22 years now.
Yeah, and we still love it. We still got a passion for it.
like any job, it has its ups and downs.
Yeah, for sure.
Any job can have frustrations, but yes, I mean, at the end of the day, I'm a volunteer. They don't force me to put my name on a ballot paper.
Yeah.
And I will go again, and then hopefully my employers will decide they want to renew my employment to represent them. But I've never taken anything for granted. My best friend in politics was Sir David Amess, who, as we know, was brutally murdered by a terrorist a couple of years ago. I still miss him. But he always taught me, well, he taught me many things, but he always taught me never to take anything for granted, and always in an election to go out there and fight for every vote. So I will bear David's advice in mind, and that is what I will do, and it will be up to my employers to decide.
Absolutely, yeah. I think this is a good spot to now sort of look on things that maybe are happening in your constituency. So we were looking, we spoke before about RAC, which for those that don't know is reinforced, autoclaved,
aerated concrete.
That's it. So shorten it down, RAC.
Yes.
What is RAC, and why is it important that we care about RAC?
Right. So RAC is the simplest way to think of it. And some of your listeners will be old enough to understand this analogy and some won't. But years ago, you used to have a thing called an aero bar, which was chocolate with bubbles in it. And RAC is a bit like that. It's concrete that had bubbles in it. And it was used, under governments of both colours, a lot from the sort of late 50s on to around about the 90s in public buildings, because it was cheaper than traditional concrete. The problem is, as we now know, is that over time some of those bubbles, as it were, burst, and then the concrete can, particularly if it gets wet, if water gets into it, and then the concrete can degrade and become structurally weak. So what happened was that, knowing this, a couple of years ago or so, the Department for Education sent out a survey to all the schools around the country, asking them if they believed they had any RAC in their buildings. And when the surveys came back, those that thought knew they had RAC or thought they had RAC, they then sent out a team of surveyors to go and look at these schools and inspect them. I first came across this issue about 2 years ago, because at King Edmund's School, KES, at Ashington in my constituency, their main block, they found RAC there. So I helped them, in conversations with DfE ministers, to get the money to rebuild that block. So they had to close the block off. They got in relocatable classrooms, which are a much higher standard than the sort of windy demountables that I knew from the 70s and 80s. And then they decided to knock down the main block and rebuild it. Now, in the case of KES, they knew there was some asbestos in the block, so they brought in a specialist contractor to remove the asbestos, and then they demolished it. Problem was, when they did that, they found in the rubble a whole bunch of additional asbestos that no one knew was there. So now you've got this pile of rubble with asbestos, and obviously, that can be carried in the air. So then they had to close the entire school. And to cut a very long story short, they managed to find further accommodation to educate the KES pupils, who by now had been through quite a bit as it was. And they then completely cleared the site. And the good news is that as we speak, they're building a brand new block at KES, like a phoenix rising from the ashes. And that will hopefully open in 2025. So I had a kind of, no pun intended, crash course in RAC because of what happened at King Edmund. Then with this latest round of schools, there were 3 more in my patch affected, which were Bromford's in Wickford, Wyburn's in Rayleigh, and Hockley Primary. And the difficulty there is they gave the announcement to close the schools about a week before the end of the summer term. Now, quite rightly, a lot of parents who were then inconvenienced, they had to make arrangements, if they had younger children to keep them at home. And people ask me again and again, why did they do this a week before the summer holidays ended? And it might help your listeners to understand that, in a nutshell, when they did this survey, when the results came back and they sent out surveyors, all the schools that had RAC, they graded in one of 4 categories in terms of the level of risk: critical, high, medium and low. And a week before the end of the summer term, a ceiling beam with RAC in it came through the roof of a classroom. And it was a school down in Kent, I think. But that was one that they'd previously assessed as being low risk. So as you can imagine, at that point the system went into overdrive, and they played ultra safe and closed all or part of schools, where they had RAC, just to be doubly safe. So that's what led to what appeared to the general public to be this last-minute confusion. Okay, so we're now in the process of working our way through it. So in the case of Bromford's, there were 2 large teaching blocks which have had to be closed, and I've had lots of meetings with education ministers on this, from Gillian Keegan downwards. Helped to get Baroness Barron, who's the school's funding minister, down to Bromford's a few weeks ago. She was keen to see it for herself, so all credit to her. And Essex County Council have played a blinder on this. Tony Ball, who's a Wickford County Councillor, he heads up the sort of schools department of County Hall, and Claire Kershaw, their education director, they've moved heaven and earth in this. So at Bromford's now, they managed to get in about a dozen relocatable classrooms, and I went to inspect them myself a couple of weeks ago. They've also used what's called the Collaborative Learning Centre, which was an Essex County Council owned facility on the Bromford school site. They've now temporarily put the Bromford sixth form in there, and that actually seems to be working really well. With a bit of luck, they'll be able to continue doing that for some years. But now that these relocatables are in use, they've got all of the Bromford's pupils back on the school site getting face-to-face education. So we're working our way through it, and the hope is that we can get Bromford's confirmed in something called the School Rebuilding Programme, the SRP, which would mean that within the next few years, well, hopefully sooner than that, they can start rebuilding those 2 main blocks, a bit like they've done at King Edmund, and then all the pupils can move back into those. So there is now hopefully a way forward, but as a constituency MP, bearing in mind we've had that at Hockley and at Wyburns as well, it's been a tremendous amount of work, endless meetings, but we are slowly going through it. And if I may, I'd like to pay tribute to all the staff at all these schools who have really gone the extra mile to help look after the pupils, keep them safe, try and keep their education going, and indeed to the parents and the pupils for their forbearance. So I hope that wasn't too long-winded an explanation, but it is quite a complicated subject. No, you're right. But the bottom line is, we're getting there. Yeah. But it's been a very challenging journey.
No, yeah, you're right. It is complicated, and for a lot of people think, well, why is this a problem? Why is this an issue? So I thank you for sort of explaining it more, and maybe helping us to understand why this is a thing and why we're working so hard to change things up. And as an old Bromford's boy myself, I'm glad that this has been spotted and they're going to make it even better. We were discussing before we started recording, and when we were sort of looking at RAC, Cyprex. What's that?
Right. Okay. So I grew up on Alcatraz, as it was nicknamed. Literally across the road, there was another big estate with about 800 houses on it, and it was known as the Cyprex estate. And the reason for that was it was made of RAC, and it was a variant of RAC produced by a Swedish company, and their product was known as Cyprex.
Gotcha.
So in just the same way that Five Links got nicknamed, that estate quickly got nicknamed the Cyprex estate. And the problem was that similar over time, the walls started cracking. So I served on the council, as I say, from 91 to 95. And we got the building research establishment in, to survey all of this. And on the basis of their findings, we went to what was then the old Department of the Environment, the DOE, and we managed to get £30 million out of the department, and that's in 1990s money, so it would be a lot more now, to completely rebuild the estate. So all the people were temporarily decanted, bit by bit. They demolished the estate and they built brand new traditional style housing. And that area now in London is known as the Church View Estate, because from there you can see St Nicholas Church on the hill.
Right, of course, yeah.
And so that was a major rebuild. It was a very big program. But hopefully, we did the right thing.
Absolutely. Let's talk about your constituency. Let's talk about Wickford. There is a lot of things going on in Wickford. There is like a master plan. And Wickford's a small place, so it's amazing that so many things are happening there. Let's talk about the train station and what's been happening there.
Yeah, it's this has been quite a challenge. So let me again give you the quick version for brevity. But Bellio Greater Anglia, who are the train operator on the main line into Liverpool Street, have brought in some brand new trains, which, to be fair to them, are pretty good. But in order to accommodate those trains in Wickford, particularly for the branch line that goes out onto the Dengie Peninsula, they had to extend some of the platforms at the station. So they had to do some building work in order to make that possible. Problem is, they knocked down half of Wickford Station to do it, and then haven't rebuilt it. So the station functions, but it doesn't look very pretty, and there aren't that many places for people to shelter from the rain. You've got a kind of half-finished station. So I've been lobbying Abellio very hard to come up with plans to rebuild the station, as indeed a number of my employers in Wickford. So the good news is after I've had them in my office. We've had some what the diplomats would call free and frank exchanges of views on this. A few months ago, they finally put in a planning application to Basildon Borough Council to rebuild the station, and hopefully the building work on that can commence next year, once the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, and we should get in effect a brand new station at Wickford. So that now is the plan, but I, as the local MP, am very much keeping up the pressure on Abellio, including to make sure that they come up with the money to do it. Yeah. So hopefully there will be good news on that. Well, the first bit of good news is they finally brought in the planning application, so that's good. And then we need to double check on the finances, and then hopefully they can start the rebuild of Wickford Station next year. So that's the station. There's been another big issue about supermarkets, because the main supermarket in Wickford was the Co-op one, and the supermarket car park there, and there's also a public car park that's run by the council. That is effectively the main car park for the town. And there was a plan by Morrison's to refurbish the old Co-op store as a kind of brand new supermarket. But the land is now owned by a property development company called Heriot, and Heriot have been preparing a planning application to redo the supermarket, but then to put about 130 flats on top of it. And I think, to cut a long story short, the people in Wickford quite like the supermarket, but they're not so keen on the flats. But anyway, whilst all of this has been argued about, the supermarket, the old Co-op, has remained closed. At the same time, the Aldi supermarket, just off the high street, they have been closed for a kind of refurbishment and expansion. So that was just unfortunate timing. So it's been a bit of a perfect storm. So for my constituents in Wickford, the only supermarket they've really had access to locally has been a small Iceland in the high street. Well, credit to them, for keeping the flag flying sort of thing. But the two main supermarkets in the town were closed. So, that meant if you wanted to do a big weekly shop, you probably had to go into Basildon or somewhere else. And if you didn't have your own transport, that could be quite challenging. So the good news is that we managed to, Aldi officially reopened the new supermarket in late November. And so we've now got one of our supermarkets back, and that's proving to be very popular. The store's about 25% larger than the one it replaced.
Yeah.
So it's got a wider offer, a wider range of goods on sale. It employs more people, particularly young people. So that's sort of the good. And we're still trying to work through what's going to happen to the co-op supermarket. Because I think my constituents, one way or another, want their supermarket back. But at least we've got one out of the two. So there's been a lot of work involved in doing all of that as well. So those are two quite big issues that have been affecting my employers in Wickford.
No, it's amazing to see so many things are happening in Wickford. I know there's some stumbling blocks and we're going to get there, but to see so many changes happening in Wickford, because it's an old town, it's got a lot of history. The train station itself is almost like 125 years. It's very important to the town, and to see it be redeveloped and changed is fantastic. To see that it's still going, it's thriving.
Well, it's there was Basildon Council completely refurbished the leisure centre there, including the swimming pool, a few years ago. That's all to the good. There was a brand new doctor's surgery built there a few years ago, for the London Road surgery. I think it's officially titled the new surgery, but lots of residents still call it the London Road surgery, even though it's no longer in London Road. And that's to the good. So there has been investment going into Wickford. But there've been a lot of new flats being built in the town, and so rightfully residents there have been saying, okay, well, these flats are, people need somewhere to live, but what about the infrastructure and everything that goes around that? And and a train station's a classic piece of infrastructure, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, but I think these issues are gradually being addressed, but it has all taken time. By the way, the leisure centre, the pool,
fantastic, isn't it?
Well, they very kindly invited me as the local MP to reopen it, because it had been closed for about a year. They completely revamped the changing rooms, and I think they retiled the pool. Fine, would I come along and cut the ribbon? Yeah, I'd be delighted to. And then about 3 days before, one of your colleagues from Basildon Council sent me an email and said, by the way, bring your trunks. You're opening it underwater. And I'm like, what is this about? So when I turned up on the day, they got this, red ribbon, but the idea was I was going to have to cut it underwater. So there I am on my trunks, and there were some local councillors helping me. Malcolm Buckley, who is a Wickford County councillor now, and Kevin Blake, who I think is the deputy leader of Basildon Borough Council. I've known them both for years. Anyway, cut long story short, they had some people with a sort of very high-tech underwater camera to take the photo, a bit like a sort of Jacques Cousteau for people of a certain generation. He was a great underwater explorer. So the idea was that we would duck under the water and then cut the ribbon, and they would take a photo of it. So far, so good. Problem was, because the pool had been closed for over a year, they over-chlorinated it. They overdid it when they put the chlorine in. So from the moment your eyes went underwater, they were stinging like mad. So we did a number of sort of takes, if you like, where we simulated cutting the ribbon. And every time we bobbed up, with our eyes streaming, the person on the camera went, "No, that didn't come out." So
do it again.
we had about a dozen goes at this, and in the end, we sort of went on strike. And we said to the person with the camera, "Look," and I said, "Okay, no more simulations. We're going to give this one last go. I'm going to cut the ribbon. You just take the best photo you can, right?" because by now it was very uncomfortable. So we did about take 12, and they, you know, we went down because, and with natural buoyancy, you know, the tendency is for you to float to the top. But Kevin Blake's a big lad, so he was leaning on my back to stop me kind of floating to the surface. I cut the ribbon, and we bobbed up, and the person behind the camera went, "Oh, great, that came out perfectly." So we're thinking, why in the first place? Anyway, so that was how I reopened, and I'm very proud of that photograph. And I think I actually put it on my 2015 election address from memory. Was it that? So yes, that's the most unusual official opening that I've ever performed as a member of Parliament.
Well, I think that is as good a place as any to leave it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for giving us your time today. I really do appreciate it, and I'm sure that everyone watching is excited to see that we have an MP join us on the show. So thank you very much.
It's been my pleasure. It's nice to be back in the council in the council offices again. Good. Thank you for what you do.
Thank you. And thank you all for watching. I do hope you enjoyed today's episode. As always, if there's anyone you'd like us to talk to, if there's anything you'd like us to discuss or look into, please do send us your comments and messages. We do really appreciate it. Thank you very much for watching, and thank you for joining us again. Thank you.
My pleasure, literally.